Welcome to the Health IT Nexus podcast, Health IT Nexus, where healthcare, information, technology, and business converge. I'm your host, Charlie Malio, and today I'm pleased to have as my guest Justin Armstrong. Justin is the founder and CEO of Armstrong Risk Management. Armstrong Risk Management provides vital cybersecurity, privacy, and compliance leadership for your organization. They can work with you to build your program from the ground up, focus on specific areas or projects, or assess your organization's security, privacy, and compliance risk. Justin, thanks for being on the show today.
Oh, thanks for having me here, Charlie. What a pleasure.
So before we get too deep into business, what I'd like to do, and for those who are new to the show, is we like our audience to get to know our guests a little better on a personal level. And we do that by asking our guests to share a fun fact about themselves, which we'll touch on a little bit now, and then we'll return to later in the show. So, Justin, with that in mind, what can you tell our audience about Justin Armstrong that they might not know?
Well, even though I'm kind of a dyed-in-the-wool New Englander, lived most of my life in Massachusetts, I had a life-changing summer living and working in Alaska. So we could talk about that
Oh,
more.
wow. It's funny. My son had a classmate in high school who did that for the summer, and it was a pretty enriching experience. So we'll definitely talk more about that towards the end of the podcast. But for now, it's time to talk about healthcare IT and cybersecurity. So, maybe to start, can you tell us more about your background and what led you to found Armstrong Risk Management?
Certainly. So I was at Meditech for 22 years and thoroughly enjoyed it. In fact, I was involved with a lot of cool projects like the early days of electronic prescribing. So we were actually working closely with SureScripts and CVS and those groups on, creating this whole electronic prescribing and interfacing it with the EHR. So it was really exciting. And I love it too, because I also worked on patient discharge and nursing flow sheet. And so when I go to hospitals, in fact, I was in a hospital recently and I see some of my work there. It just is very gratifying. Uh, One thing that wasn't gratifying, though, was as I moved into a security and compliance role at Meditech, was dealing with ransomware at hospitals.
Right.
And that was really distressing. We would see, hospitals get hit with ransomware in varying degrees, sometimes down for weeks or even a month or two. And so I went to a cybersecurity startup after Meditech, and then now I'm out on my own doing consulting because firmly believe in this mission of helping healthcare against these terrible attacks.
No, that's great. And maybe we'll hit on ransomware in a bit. I think that's an important topic.
Mhm.
Before we do get too far in the conversation, though, I thought it might be instructive for our audience to define some terms. And I know you have experience in security, privacy, and compliance. And these are three distinct topics that often get lumped together. So maybe you can define these terms for our audience and sort of highlight the differences and the different approaches.
Yep.
And, what does the healthcare organization need to know about those?
Yeah, I'll actually start with privacy because, we're trying to protect people's health information. We're trying to keep it confidential. There's sensitive details that people don't want out there. And security is the process of protecting that information. Because security talks about confidentiality. But there's also two other components to security, and that's integrity. So making sure that the records are accurate. We don't want someone going in and changing your health
Right.
record, your allergies, your medications. But then the third one that I see that most people forget about is availability. That's keeping the systems up. So a lot of times in the early days when I would get involved with discussions about backups and disaster recovery, people would say, "Why are you involved with this? This isn't a security issue." Well, yes, it is.
Right.
It is a
Right.
fundamental part of security. And then lastly, compliance is the act of just making sure you're in compliance with legal regulations. But the problem is you can't confuse the two. I like to use this analogy I heard from Kevin McGee over at Microsoft. He used to be at a Brant Community Hospital, I believe. And he said that basically compliance is you always cross in the crosswalk, but security is that you look both ways first. You make sure you're safe.
Oh, that's a great
So
analogy. That's memorable. I think I'll remember that for sure. So that's
yeah, I
great.
like that one.
In your experience, and we talk about healthcare organizations, what percentage of healthcare organizations do you think have a dedicated CISO versus someone who shares that title with their other responsibilities, often the CIO? And how important is it these days for a healthcare organization to have someone who's dedicated to that CISO role full time?
hmm Yeah, I've seen differing statistics as high as 50%, but in my experience, a lot of organizations have a director of IT or a director of security that fills that role. Um, Unfortunately, a lot of the small and mid-sized hospitals, they just see it as an IT problem. But it really needs to be handled at an executive level because, the IT director is focused on making the systems, keeping them running and things like that. But they're not interfacing necessarily with the other executives, talking with the chief medical officer about making sure that there's good downtime procedures and all these other areas of security that dovetail with how the hospital works. So, yeah, it kind of concerns me that they don't all have someone in this role. Even if it doesn't really matter what the title is, but if you got someone that's a director of security, I would like to see them interfacing with the rest of the community. For instance, they tend to be isolated in IT, which could be in one of those little closets down in the basement or a separate
Right.
building. But they really need to be out there and visible, evangelizing security, meeting with clinicians, meeting with regular staff day to day and just finding out what their challenges are and how they can help them to be secure without getting in the way.
So what you're saying is if you're at a hospital and you're the chief nursing officer or the director of pharmacy and you have never met with your head of security, cybersecurity, or maybe don't even know who their name is, then something's wrong at that organization.
Yeah, and this kind of snuck up on us, to be fair, like IT was brought in to create systems and run them, and then all of a sudden we became so dependent on them. I like to joke that, at the EHR vendors, we did our job so well now people don't know what to do without the EHR, you
Well,
know.
that's a great point because if there's a downtime event, they talk about going back to paper. There's no paper to go back to. It's not as if people have paper processes that they can follow. They've learned everything on the computer. There was just another, outage this week, and
Mhm.
same thing. They said people are going back, so-called back to paper, but they don't know what that means because they've never been trained on doing their job anyway, but on the EHR.
Yeah, and it's not just a healthcare problem. We see this all over the place that, like for instance, automotive dealerships, their systems went down due to ransomware at a major vendor a few
Yes,
weeks or months ago.
right,
And people just there's no way to handle things. Like how do you complete financing? How do you order parts and things like that? So it's a big problem.
for sure. So it seems to me like healthcare organizations are more frequently being targeted by cyber criminals now. Is that just my perception, or is it a reality that they're actually, being hit more today than they were in the past?
Oh no, it's definitely a reality. In fact, the director of national intelligence released some stats and said that about 4% of U.S. hospitals were hit with ransomware, and I think it was 2022 or 23. And so we see this trend where it continues to increase year over year. Because I've kept my own stats. Back in 2020, I think it was like 1%, then it went up to 2%. Now we're at 4% plus of all US hospitals. So that's very concerning. And then there's been other stats that say it's higher, but I think they're talking more about like someone has ransomware, but it didn't necessarily bring down the whole network. I'm more focused on, events where the whole network is down, people are going back to paper, because that's very troubling.
That's the most catastrophic event. So we've mentioned ransomware a couple of times, and I think it's worth
hmm
hitting on because it gets a lot of attention in the media. In fact, I can recall, you may as well, a few years ago, there was an incident here in Massachusetts, and this
hmm
wasn't actually healthcare. This was in a local police department, and they were hit with ransomware, and they didn't have their data backed up. And I remember watching the news report, and the FBI had told them, "Well, if you want your data back, you got to pay the ransom." And the police spokesperson, I mean, he was almost apoplectic on this interview saying, but we're the police. How can they get away with this? But I think the message is instructive and for healthcare as well. No one's
hmm
immune. There's some hacker in a sweatshop in Nigeria. He could not care less if you're a police department, a hospital, or whatever. There's no privileged status when it comes to victims. So if you're a
Yeah.
healthcare CISO, like what are the special steps you should be taking to deal maybe specifically with ransomware?
Well, there's the problem is in healthcare, there's so many different systems, and you got some systems that you have difficulty patching, like medical devices, Internet of Things devices, such as things that connect to the HVAC system. And these systems all need to be segmented off on their own network and protected in other ways, because you're just not going to be able to protect the hackers, prevent the hackers from getting on there. So that's a big challenge. It's not easy to do. I've seen a lot of big hospitals achieve success with that, but it is a challenge. Um, in fact, I was involved with a recent IEEE standard for medical IoT devices, and we're
Okay.
focused on trying to help the industry do a better job there. So if you ever get a chance, it's IEEE 2933 for clinical interoperability with TIPS, it's called.
That's
Try.
that's
But
important because
yeah.
you're right. There are so many sort of attack vectors, right? Not just the EHR, which is probably the most um, obvious one, but yeah,
Hmm.
some sort of, monitoring device that's running Windows 98 or something that hasn't been patched in 10 years or some crazy thing, right? That somebody can find a way to creep onto the network. So, um,
Yeah. Oh, that's a
yeah.
big problem because a lot of hospitals are still running out-of-date software servers and desktops. And like in my own personal life, I recently had two MacBooks that are now end of life, and I can't use them for work because they haven't been updated in a year. They don't have security updates. So, but a
Right.
lot of hospitals are still running systems like that and makes them vulnerable. So that's a big problem. And it's difficult. I mean, I acknowledge it's difficult. I mean, if you got 500, 600 servers and you got to upgrade them to a new version of Windows, that's an expensive effort and that's fraught with danger because,
It's
things stop working.
Yeah, it's not an easy task for sure. So, and it's probably speaking about that, right? So we know technology moves fast,
Hmm.
right? But the bad actors, they're really good at exploiting new technology for their
Hmm.
nefarious ends. So, what risks do some of these new things like deep fakes and AIs, what risks do those pose for healthcare organizations? And, how can you protect yourself from falling victim to those risks?
Yeah, those scare me a bit because they have gotten really good. Recently, I did a tabletop exercise with an organization, and the guy I was working with, he actually did a deep fake of their CEO. So
Mm,
he had a recording. It sounded just like their CEO. One of the people said, "That is so creepy. It sounds just like him." And another person that worked with the CEO more regularly didn't fall for it. But the thing is, it's going to trick most of the
it's
people.
gonna, yeah, and it's
So,
trivial. I mean, there's great software. 11 Labs comes to mind where you can upload a sample of a voice recording,
yep.
and it will create an AI voice, and you can make that voice say anything. And there's not really a lot of guardrails, right? So all you have to
No.
do is, somebody gets a CIO who's talking at a conference or the CEO, easy to get their audio uploaded into one of these tools or, use a tool
Hmm.
locally. And now, you can, hey, this is the CEO calling into payroll to, or what, accounts payable to cut a check or something, and
Yeah.
somebody can fall for it.
Well,
So
it's always
what
good
do
to
you
have
put in
good
place to prevent
controls.
that then? Or how do you
Yeah.
educate? Is it education? What do you do so people don't fall victim to that?
It's basically a lot of good process. Like I have to say, when I was at Meditech, that was one area I didn't lose sleep over because there was a lot of good financial processes in place. So, for instance, if there was going to be an expense or a payment to a vendor, it would have to go through an electronic system, get approval by the manager and the director of that division. So there was a lot of controls in place to prevent this. And if someone had said, "Oh, I'm the CEO," they would have just laughed. Well, for
Right.
one thing, he'd probably just walk down the hall and say, "I have
Right.
this urgent thing that," but if they really did get an email like that, they wouldn't just act on that. They'd say, "Well, we have to put this in the system. Let me call them and make sure it's legit." But it just floors me that so many organizations out there, someone gets an email and they just act on it. It's like, really? You know? And
Yeah.
and and sadly, this doesn't just happen in the corporate environment, but a friend of mine is a realtor, and he said that he was sitting on the beach one day and he gets a call from one of his customers, and they said, "Why did you change the bank routing information?" Because
Uh-huh.
they're about to make the final payment on the
Yes.
house. And this is so common because lawyers and realtors, they don't have good security on their email accounts. So the hacker gets in there, waits until the day of the closing, and then just says, "Oh, we've changed the routing information." And people just pay it and they don't bother to call and say, "Hey, why are you changing this?" It's so simple. Just pick up the phone,
Right.
call the person, talk to them in person, talk on Zoom, whatever.
And that money is gone. It's funny that you bring that up. We bought a new house
Yeah.
last year, and the attorney was very clear. She said, "This is a huge problem." Said, "You are only going to get this information from me over the phone. You're going to talk to me. Here's how you're going to do it. And if anybody tells you it
Mm,
changes, don't do it." Because she had a client not that long ago had went through the same thing, and that money
yeah.
was gone. And they get the FBI involved. They said, "Sorry."
Yeah,
So,
you have
yeah,
basically 2 or 3 days, and then after that, it's totally
yeah.
gone.
So.
Yeah.
What as we're looking we're focused on healthcare organizations, and what do you think is the most sort of overlooked thing in cybersecurity?
I really think it's the building the people, the culture.
Okay.
Like for instance, my friend David Ting, I think you know him as well. He said he was at a hospital once, and the doctor said to him, "Oh, if I get malware on this machine, I just go to a different machine because I don't want to get berated by IT for doing something stupid like clicking on a
Oh,
phishing
great.
link." So, a lot of it has to do with people. People are not your weakest link, but your greatest ally. Like if you got people that are speaking up and saying, "Hey, I feel uncomfortable. A patient asked me to email sensitive data to them. How do I know this is really them?" So people can be your greatest ally too. They point out problems. Once you get them on board, and you've cultivated a relationship with them and you make them realize that you're not going to berate them for making mistakes because we all make mistakes.
Right.
It should be like, like they talk about in aviation and in healthcare about having a safety culture, one where that people always feel comfortable to come forward and talk about problems, and you will never be put down for bringing up an issue. That's what needs to be built around security as well.
Yeah, I think that's really important because the attacks continue to get more and more sophisticated, and you can fall victim to these things no matter, even if you're really well
Hmm.
versed in the culture. So to have, just the average, admissions clerk not feel bad about, hey, you get this email. Well, if something seems wrong, send this, call up IT and say, hey,
Hmm.
this doesn't seem right. And even if it,
Yeah.
maybe it slows down your workflow a little bit, but it's better that than the alternative.
Yeah, and it's a combination of culture reinforced with technology. Like I always like to say, the system shouldn't be so vulnerable that if someone clicks on a phishing link, your whole network goes down, you know.
Exactly.
And
Exactly. No.
I've seen this where technology can also reinforce security practices. Like, for instance, I was visiting a major office supply company, and a friend of mine invited me to go there for a security meeting, and I accidentally parked in the wrong spot. I tried to get in the employee entrance,
Okay.
and I asked someone, they said, "Not only can I not let you in because it's against policy, but if I let you in, you can't get anywhere. Every door is badged. You literally can't move around."
Right.
And so it was a good reinforcement of it. So I always stress that, like if your emails say, "Hey, warning, this is an external email, be careful," that's reinforcing the good behavior.
Right. No, that's great. What do you say? Unfortunately, I've heard this a few times
Mhm.
from certain, I won't unnamed healthcare executives, and I think it's a dying breed. But sometimes I'll hear somebody say, "Yeah, we can do all that stuff, but you know what? We have cyber insurance." And I'm like, "Well, what do you say to them?" I know what I'd say to them, but I want to hear what you would say to them because I think that's naive at best. But
Well, so when I first heard that, my first thought was, you know what? As time goes on, you're going to be uninsurable, and cyber insurance is going to stop paying, and cyber insurance is going to start stipulating things. And that's exactly what's happened. They've been a lot more proactive. Like the cybersecurity questionnaires went from just a few questions to, very detailed questions. And then if you don't answer accurately and you get hit, then they're not going to pay. They're going to find a reason not to pay. So it's true that, cyber insurance is good because it protects against things that you can't prevent. Like, for instance, someone gets a 0 day. By definition, it means it's an exploit that nobody knows about. So,
right,
so what are you going to do? The cyber insurance is great. It's going to protect you against those things. but it can't protect you against your own stupidity, so to speak, like or your own negligence. Let's use that.
Right.
Like for instance, I always like to use car driving analogies. If I'm reckless with my driving and I get in an accident and they look at the video or they have testimony that I was reckless, well, you know what? Insurance isn't going to cover that. It's my fault.
Right.
So
Yeah.
we need to view cyber insurance the same way.
Yeah, and insurance is only after the fact. The damage has been done, and you still have to do the cleanup. And it's not just damage to systems; it's damage to reputation in the community, right?
Yeah.
If you're a health system and there's a breach. Um, so finally, Justin, I'd like to ask, what advice would you have for a new healthcare CISO, either somebody who's maybe new to the role or they're new to an
Mm.
organization? What advice do you have for them to get them off on the right foot and to start strong in that position?
Well, I suppose number one, build that relationship with the rest of the executives, the team throughout the organization, but you have to be very careful about your messaging. You're not here to say no. You're not here to lock things down or to be the police. You're here to help. And that is something that good security professionals stress all the time. Like, for instance, recently a friend of mine was telling me about a security professional that just came in and said no to everything. And so what happens? People work around that.
Right.
So it's so vital that you be part of the team. Instead of saying no, you're like, you know what? Let's find a way to help you do this that's secure and easy to use. So that would be my advice.
That's good advice, and I think it comes back to what you said earlier, which is building that security culture, right? And being
Hmm.
being out there in the organization, getting out of your office in the basement if that's where it is, and
Yeah.
and really interacting with folks and being a partner in security,
Well,
right?
Bruce
So
Bruce Schneier, who's a top security expert, he joked one time on a podcast. He said, the problem is a lot of us went into IT because we hate people, and and you really need to be a people person nowadays. You have to be out there evangelizing security.
right. No, that's a good point. So before we conclude, let's go back and revisit Alaska. So tell me about that. Was that like, after summer after high school, summer after college? What was that about?
Oh, so that was my junior year in college. A friend of mine had gone up there previously and done an internship as well at the Geophysical Institute at the University of Alaska. And I just love the outdoors, so I immediately applied to that and was so psyched to go there. So my work was exciting and fun. I was working on a computer simulation of the upper atmosphere. So that was
Oh,
cool.
okay.
But then, like, we did so much that summer, I didn't save any money. End of the summer, everything was spent because every chance we got, we would like rent a Volkswagen bus and those Euro vans. Those are
Yep.
pretty nice. And we go out to Denali. I went to Denali several times, went out to the Wrangles a couple times. Went up to view the sun's not set on solstice up at the Arctic Circle. So that was kind of funny. I was joking that's like a non-event. We came here to watch something not
You
happen.
watch the sun sort of just bounce off the horizon and go back up, right? So,
Yeah, yeah, it was very
uh,
cool. So I mean,
that's
it's just life altering. I mean, living, even though it was just 3 months, it felt like a year because we did so much in that summer. Plus, you got the midnight sun.
right.
No joke, people would be up late at night. Like I would go mountain biking at midnight and come back at 2 in the morning pretty often. And the people up there are just wonderful too. They're all very friendly. Even driving down the road, you see another person and everybody waves at each other in their car. Just so friendly.
That's great. Well, Justin, I really want to thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to be on the show today. And I hope everyone found our conversation as enlightening as I did. I think you made it clear that now more than ever, healthcare organizations are in the crosshairs of bad actors. And as a healthcare CISO, you really need to have a plan in place for how you're going to react, not if, but when your organization is targeted by the bad guys. Um, So this has been the Health IT Nexus podcast with today's guest, CEO and founder of Armstrong Risk Management, Justin Armstrong. Health IT Nexus, where healthcare, information, technology, and business converge. Whether you're a healthcare provider, healthcare information technology vendor, value-added reseller, or a private equity firm with a focus on the healthcare vertical market, learn more about what Health IT Nexus can do for you at www.healthitnexus.com. And we hope you'll tune in next time to the Health IT Nexus podcast, where we speak with the guests from the health IT vendor community to discuss their company, their solutions, and how they are improving the delivery of healthcare through the use of technology.